You're listening to Bible Truth Feed, a podcast by christadelphianvideo.org for Christadelphians and all those seeking the truth about the Bible message. Join us now as we present our latest episode.
There's no speech or language where their voice is not heard, speaking of the heavens and the firmament and the handiwork of the Father. So there is no excuse to some extent. There's some responsibility to a degree for the entire world when they see the expanse of what God's created and the beauty of that. And for us, we've had our eyes open to more of the beauty of that. But to some level, every single language and culture has access to adore the things of God. And the essence of tonight's class is really, our young people are bombarded by evolution presented as a fact all the time. And I just wanted to show one thing, which is symbiosis, which sort of shows that if they had evolved, which of course we don't believe, but if they had, they'd have to evolve together, and two things would have to evolve at exactly the same time as one another and be entirely dependent on each other. Does anyone know what it's called when two things actually require one another, two different organisms require one another's presence to live? Symbiotic. Yeah, the symbiotic. There's different flavors of symbiosis. Yeah, Peter?
Mutual dependency.
Yeah, mutual dependency or mutualism is the name given. So an extreme version of symbiosis. You can be, a symbiote would even be like a mosquito's symbiosis arrangement. It requires something. But, isn't it lucky for the mosquito that there happen to be things to bite just in time. And that's sort of the basic essence of the class is that you have to accept that this level of complexity, that can't be undone. And so there's a basic level of the complexity, which is irreducible, is the word that's often used, irreducible complexity, which if you take one part away, the whole thing collapses. And so the essence of the class is, how can these things, these creatures that we'll see, how can they coexist, requiring one another to be there? Did they just happen to evolve at exactly the right time? Some of which will die within hours or days. So it's not, you had to evolve like by tomorrow. So, we're not trying to say this is going to prove every single thing, from a creationist perspective, but hopefully it shows something. So this is the clash between science and God. Science is forever changing, forever discovering, forever developing, and God's not. We may discover more about him and learn about him. So there's a few scriptures here which are helpful. In verse 6 of Malachi 3, he tells us he doesn't change. If you look at the Psalms, he calls himself or styles himself a rock. And that's good, because we don't want our foundation to be moving. We want our foundation to be rock-like. And so he says he doesn't change. In Hebrews 13, verse 8, in reference to Jesus, it says the same yesterday, today, and forever. There's an unchangeableness to the Lord Jesus. In James 1, verse 17, the Father who does not change. So at that point, you obviously have a problem with that which is provable and that which is not. And so 1 Corinthians 1, verse 26, this is in the midst of a passage which is discussing wisdom, two types of wisdom. The wisdom really which is from above and that which is from the earth. And they clash. And God likes to sort of choose the things which turn things on their head. I can't remember who I was talking to, so apologies for this, but I was saying earlier today with somebody, we were chatting about this. When the wise men came to Jerusalem, why did they go to Jerusalem? Oh, it's the capital city, right? So they came to see Jesus. They went to the capital city, and they go to the palace, and they go speak to the king. Because, why wouldn't you? But that's not where God put Jesus. Right? The Son of God chose to have his son, thought to possibly be born of fornication, which he knew that would be inferred, in the back of the inn, because they weren't, I imagine they weren't allowed in the front of the inn, because here's this pregnant woman who's not married. And if Joseph came from Bethlehem, weren't there going to be, like if you come to Wales, my family's going to put me up, right? If I go to Wales, if they come over here, I'm going to put them up. But Joseph's family, presumably a big family, there wasn't anywhere for him to stay. Isn't that funny? So they're at the back of the inn, and God loves to turn things on their heads, doesn't he? So he's not in the capital city. He's in the least in Bethlehem, the least of the towns of Judah. He's not in the palace. He's not even in the inn. He's out the back. And if we're raised in the truth, or if we're raised with Christian knowledge, where else would Jesus be but in the trough? That doesn't really make sense, does it? Because that's where the cattle eat from. But we think it's the most natural thing ever if we've been raised with it, that the baby's in the trough. And because God likes to turn things on their head, and so he can confound the wise. So I do wonder if some of the things that people go off on tangents on are almost, maybe not deliberately placed, but to make it so you have to be humble. There's not many wise after the flesh, not many noble. There's not too many presidents who are baptized, but I was hearing about some earlier today who may have had a good knowledge. So we can't present things as if, here's, like after tonight's class, you have all the proof you need. So we have to recognize that we have some evidence, but it's not conclusive proof. But it's also not blind. So there's a reasonableness to an understanding that God is a God of creation. There's, from the other side, if you were an evolutionist, you'd have to have a lot of faith too. And so you can't, if you're an evolutionist, say about creationists, that we have to have all this kind of faith and believe in magic. Whereas from their side, you can't say that when you don't know any of these things, haven't got any of the proof either. In Hebrews 11, it talks about faith as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's not blind faith. And in Psalm 19, we have a proof from God that he's cast the stars into the skies and said, there you go, there's no speech nor language where this isn't going to be heard. So he declares himself in that. And so this really is a large component of what we're going to talk about tonight, the irreducible complexity, is what it's called. If you imagine an ear where you have the tympanic membrane, and you have everything all the way through to the stapes, everything, the entire ear, but there isn't actually any nerve that goes into the brain. There's not much use, because that bit didn't get evolved yet. The brain itself is a remarkable piece of software to interpret the zeros and ones, really, that are coming down the nerve from the auditory canal. And so you can't reduce it. You have to have a full ear or not an ear. And if you don't have a full ear, then why have you wasted all this energy on that? And where are all these half ears along the way? So that's, the basis to what we're talking about tonight. If you could have a look at Romans chapter 1. If we look from verse 17, for therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it to them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. So when you explore that first component of verse 20, the invisible things of God, so the things we can't prove, like the things we need faith for, his existence even, the invisible things of God from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. How many people in this room are artists? Are there many here who like artists? Or even musicians? David did a nice job today, some great musicians. Well, you kind of express something of yourself in your artwork or in your musical abilities. It says something about you. And so what God has laid on record is the creation. And it says something about him. It's a declaration of who he is. A sportsman on a sports field. Any sportsmen here? No, there's some. Well, you express yourselves. I don't know if you were told this by your coaches, but you were told to go out there and express yourself. And you declare something about you in the way you play and conduct yourself in the game. And it's true in all aspects of life. It's not limited to just those people we just listed. And with God, the things of eternity, the things of his principle, the things of his character are expressed by the things that he's made, even his eternal power and Godhead. So even the Godhead, even the actual essence of God is expressed by his creation. Great cook, any great cooks in the room? You show something about yourself in what you make, and you put something of it into it. Now, bad cooks, we just do whatever we, that's just the way it is. And maybe that says something of us too. But what we find with God is that we can look outside and we can see what he likes. Why did he make rainbows? Other than, what he tells us about in Genesis. Because he loves things that are beautiful and pretty. He likes that. So he actually tells us a little bit about what he enjoys by what he's created. He obviously enjoys multiple things. He enjoys a vast array of things and abundance too. Why didn't he make one pollen make the tree? And that was enough. One pollen and one nut and one piece of fruit. But it's like boosh, and the pollen's out, and we love that. And I'm always thankful for it. So that tells us, though, what he's like. And how many of those pollen actually do anything? Not many. Even how many sperm make one child out of millions? And why? He didn't have to do that. He could have done whatever he wanted. He could have made one of everything, and that's enough. And so he likes cycles, he likes abundance, he likes complexity. And to make it and have it sustain, we often perhaps neglect to be in marvel about that. He is the creator and the sustainer. And you think about, if you make something, there's engineers, I'm sure, in this room, or people who work on cars or mechanics of some type, to make something like a computer and that's it, walk away and it's done for thousands of years. I mean, that's just incredible. And parts can change out. And if something's moved, then something else can come into its place. To create something like that and walk away and allow it to sustain is just remarkable. And so we're left with a feeling of awe. That's how I say it. I don't know how you guys say it. My sons always pick me up for saying strange things. Is that it? I don't know. Anyway, so have a look at verse 20. The expression of God's own essence is in what he has made. So, verse 20, that they are without excuse. Psalm 19 says, every speech and language has declared it. Romans 1 is telling us there's no excuse for there is a level of responsibility for everybody. Now, if you back up, it was in verse 18 where it says they hold the truth in unrighteousness. So there's, I'm sure, a little bit more to this than just seeing creation. But there's a level of responsibility for these people from seeing the creation. Verse 21, because that when they knew God, that's gnosko, so that's to know by experience. So they got a little bit more knowledge than perhaps the Eskimo who sees the northern lights, who had never heard of God. These people have a bit more knowledge of God. Gnosko, they knew by experience. When they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. We probably have read this before. We know where this ends up, and the vile behavior later on in this chapter can be traced back to some pretty simple things. They knew God, they'd seen creation, and they failed to do two things: glorify God and be thankful. So, if nothing else, by the end of this class, hopefully, you'll re-evaluate the amount of praise you want to give God and glory, and think about whether you want to be thankful. Because I don't know about you, but when I see these things, I nearly drop to my knees about what God's done. So we're going to have a look at these different things. The symbiotes, the mutualists, and the challenge for the evolutionists is how did they simultaneously come along? So the first one is quite a funny one because these are absolutely massive animals, aren't they? So I remember doing some parts of this talk in Germany. It was quite funny because they knew all different types of cattle. Does anyone know what type of cattle these are? It's probably... Yeah, wow, who was that? Very good. Now, in Britain, we call what you call a Holstein, we call it a Frisian, or a Frisian Holstein. Actually, we say Holstein, but that doesn't matter. Yeah. Now, who knows what this? I bet there's some people in the room know what that is. A water buffalo? Who said that? A Canadian said that? You've got to be kidding me. Actually, you know, they get pretty crazy, don't they, these things? They go loopy. Now, there is another type of symbiote, actually I wasn't going to talk about, but I will now. It lives in a snail, and it's amazing that these bacteria and viruses and protozoa and stuff, these little things, microorganisms, can actually change the behavior of their host. Like cats, you know, there's a thing that lives in cats that can actually go into humans and it can change the behavior. It goes into rats and it makes the rats run towards cats. But it's really weird, like the behavior changes. Like, you know, how do you get a cocktail of drugs and you're a little tiny bug? Now, if I do this, then I could probably get a rat to run to the cat. Like, okay. But there's one that actually affects any animal that's eating grass, which is in a meadow where there's a lot of moisture in the ground. And there's a little snail that will go around, and this snail has got a bug in it, and the microorganism changes the behavior of the snail and causes it to crawl, or whatever snails do, to the top of a blade of grass and hang out there. And then an animal like what one of these is comes along and eats it, and the snail gets destroyed. But the little microorganism now goes into the herbivore, and its predilectory site is the brain. So it finds its, I mean, how clever is this, right? It finds its way around the body. Okay, that's goes through, okay, I need to go right here. And it goes all the way up to the brain, and it makes cysts in the brain and drives these things crazy. So a moose often has actually got this little bug in it, which will actually drive it crazy. And so they literally are sometimes nuts. So they're very similar to what Legion is thought to have had in the New Testament. There's some more. Who knows what these are? Actually, do you know what type of sheep this is? No, nor do I. No. It's Welsh. It's a Welsh sheep. They're very pretty, but they're also very tasty, aren't they? Now, the brother from Switzerland who saw this got very excited when he saw that one. That's a Swiss cow. And he said, in German, he said, keinen Huhn, which means no horns. But he said it, keinen Huhn. And I was like, yes, that's what noise it makes. Correct. And he was very confused, and they haven't asked me back since, anyway. But the big problem is that these massive animals, you know, that weigh multiple tons, they can't actually digest grass. And that's because little microorganisms are required. But it's a very clever thing of them to think, you know, we could get bigger if we decide that we can bring in multiple stomachs and that we can host some microorganisms, and that will help us to break down the grass, and then we could get really big. It was very clever of them to think of this. And that's these, you can see there's 100 micron little line on the bottom there. And these are some of the protozoa that live or have to live in all these herbivores for them to actually process the grass. And without them, they can't live. So it's just as well, isn't it? A bit of luck that they just happen to have the right temperature and everything, all the salts and everything they needed. And they only last a few days, and then they get digested. So they had to think of how to replenish them, and they had to make sure they get a constant stream. I don't know if anyone works with bioremediation, but there are ways of using this to help in environmental practices to stop whatever like air pollution from going into the atmosphere. But the problem is it has to be a process that's pretty much always the same, because these bugs need to be fed. And if you're not feeding them the pollution because your process has stopped, they die. And it's the same with these. And so what happens if they all die? Does anyone know what a protozoa is? Any budding chemists or biochemists or whatever they would be, microbiologists? The protozoa is like it's different from a virus or a bacteria, and it's almost like a little tiny animal. And do you know how many protozoa you need to make? Well, in bacteria terms, you typically, depends on the bacteria, but you typically need 10,000 plus bacteria to make you sick. So if you take that cream cake that's been out all day, there's probably millions on it, and you might well get sick. But if you get it in the morning, you'll probably be okay, because there might only be 5,000 or something. With protozoa, how many protozoa do you need to make you sick, do you know? One can make you sick, so that's why they're a bit of a nightmare in the water quality. Has anyone heard of any protozoa that can make them sick? What's that? Somebody said something. What's that? A red tide? Oh, maybe. I don't know that one. The ones we usually drink that we have problems with, there's two of them, Cryptosporidia and Giardia lamblia. It's probably pronounced differently over here, I imagine. But you only need one of them to make you sick, and so it's a real pain. And here they've got the correct bacteria, which is a very correct bacteria, and the correct protozoa, and they made sure they weren't the ones that were going to hurt them, and they chose those ones off the menu. So obviously I'm mocking it a little bit, but you see the point, though, that without investing in a whole heap, or in thousands of these, and millions probably of these, which die after a few days and get digested, without investing in those, this animal, this massive elephant, can't live. So I think it's reasonable to think that God created it to be like that, to be created like that. How many stomachs do these cows and other herbivores have, typically? Who knows what they're called? You know what they're called? I'm sure somebody does. Rumen, that's what I've heard anyway. Oh, that's okay. That's not how I've heard it pronounced. Okay. The rumen, I would go rumen, the reticulum, the abomasum, and the omasum. Yeah, so you've got these 4 stomachs. That was clever of them, wasn't it, to think about getting 4 stomachs, so that when the first part of digestion had occurred, they could think about, you know what, if I puke that up into my mouth and chew on it a bit, then I could put it into a different stomach, and it would have different pH and stuff. That would be a good way of doing this. I mean, honestly, this all happened by chance. Right? So there's a bunch of them there, and if you follow that through, you'll get to it. But it's a massive investment, because these are huge animals. And if they grew that big, they had to be able to eat that day. And it's not like they eat, a couple of pounds of grass and they're done. You go to the zoo in San Diego, and there are truckloads of grasses coming in for those elephants. And they eat tons and tons in a year, literally. And so it's amazing, really, to think that this could just happen by chance. And the complexity in there, just on getting grasses degraded to the point where they can be absorbed and of use. Just that bit is amazing, let alone how does there happen to be a male and a female, and how does that all work out? And how do they have the senses, and how do they have messengers that are little proteins, and that one tells it what to do, and just a remarkable level of complexity. Does anyone know what that is? Just next slide, that's all. So pineapples and ants, I love this one. Who knows what river that is, just by looking? Amazon, very good. So there's these miraculous ants that live here. Now, the problem with the Amazon, of course, is it floods. And does anyone know how deep it will flood sometimes? The depths of it? Like 20 feet, I've heard. It will flood 20 feet. And so what was a dry river will then become as deep as this whole place in water, and they have dolphins and stuff like this just flowing around. Now, that's a bit of a pain if you're an ant, because usually you live down in the earth, but there was these ants who do this remarkable thing. So humans, they build bridges, and that's looking like a really safe one across there. It looks like one I may have built with Daniel. Daniel doesn't think I'm very good at building stuff. So here's what happens with this ant. Now, I don't know if this is the exact ant, to be honest, but they search the ground for pineapple seeds. How do they know what a pineapple seed is when you're an ant? And by the time you get it to where you want it to go, you're dead anyway, because you're an ant. You don't live very long. Anyway, they look for an ant, so they must get out their little... No, that's not one. So they go through, and they find specifically a pineapple seed. Then they take it up to the tree, And one of the engineer ants has measured to find out how far 20 feet is, what the optimal size is. I don't know how they do it. Maybe they smell and they can tell like where the floods have come. I don't know. But they go up to the optimal height in the tree to make sure they're above the flood zone area. And they plant it in mud they've already transported. So it's a remarkable level of intelligence for a little ant, isn't it? That they've figured out if they take the mud up there and they go above the flood zone, and it's specifically a pineapple seed. I'm calling it a pineapple seed, it's a more generic term than that. They take it up there, and they know that it germinates in the mud over time, and in about like 57 different lifetimes of the ant later, it's germinated enough and has actually grown. And as it grows, it produces both a safe nesting site for the ant and a feeding ground. It was very clever of them, wasn't it? They were very clever to work that out. And so you see these pineapples halfway up trees where they've planted them. And there's ant nests within there. It's just the most incredible thing. Actually, I wonder if I do have some notes on some of these things from an evolutionist, and I found it very funny. But maybe I shouldn't read them because I will mock it too much. And you probably don't want to hear me mocking things. Anyway, okay, here it is. The ant must have arrived at this process of collection and planting bromeliad seeds by some means of trial and error. Unfortunately, they died by then. But by now, it has been established as a successful venture. I found it fascinating to read this evolutionist talking about these things and just scratching her head. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, so we've got another one here, red ants and large blue butterfly. Now, this is a fascinating one, where these two species well, I don't know if you'd call it mutualism, because I think the ants can survive without the large blue, which is from Britain. It's quite a rare one. I did have I know, I'm not going to play the video, it would take too long. Well, maybe, no, I won't. I should have stacked it up. But what happens in this case is that the large blue butterfly lays its eggs, and the little aphid that comes out of it is milked by the ants. And then the ants love this thing because they love the honeydew that comes out of the aphid's rear end after it's done eating. And they milk it, and they take it around, and it's almost like cattle for the ants. And they take it down into their nest, and they actually feed it their own young. And without that, this butterfly will not pupate. So until it's eaten, there's something in the little grubs of the ants. There's something in there which is required for the large blue butterfly to pupate. So every single one of them has to have been fed with ant larvae, which the ants give to it of their own young so that they can milk it. I mean, that's just remarkable, isn't it? And so who'd have thought that this could happen? Like, would you give your own children, essentially, your own eggs to this thing, and without that, they can't live. And so then once it turns into pupa, they're like, oh, okay, well, we'll leave that alone. Oh, look, there's another one over there. And so it's this incredible complexity that's required for this particular butterfly to be able to pupate and turn into a butterfly for the next round. And I just find that absolutely fascinating that these ants do that. This one's, you know what that is, right? That's Nemo, isn't it? Now, let's see if I can find some of the things on this. I should have brought my glasses. That would have been much more helpful, wouldn't it? Oh, I don't know. Whatever. So anyway, the fascinating thing with the anemone is it's actually able to communicate with the fish. I mean, I didn't know this till I read this book. And each anemone has its own clownfish. Did you know that? I didn't know that. And so there's a mutual benefit here because the clownfish attracts things to the anemone, which the anemone then stings and eats. And the benefit to the clownfish is that it gets the scraps, and the benefit to the sea anemone is that it got a meal attracted to it. But what I didn't realize was that the sea anemone itself has got a mouth, and it will eat other clownfish which aren't its clownfish. So if a clownfish strays into the wrong sea anemone, it will eat it. And so it's able to discern which one's its own clownfish. And I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. And so that's a bit of luck for the clownfish, that this is how it's come about. And it's just another example of the complexity that God's put there. And also all these different colors. Just, does anyone here enjoy snorkeling and seeing coral reefs and stuff? I mean, I nearly swallowed my mask and scuba gear when I went down. I could not believe the colors. Now, whose glory is that for? God enjoyed it. It's not like they needed to be any particular color. In fact, almost all of the reds disappear after just a few feet. So anything red appears black after not very far and down into the ocean. And we think they're absolutely beautiful, but the fish think they're just black. And so you think of things even like a pearl. Well, why is that there? You know, you open it up, have you seen the mother of pearl inside these shells? If you just go to the beach and see a discarded shell, it didn't have to be like that. It could be anything. And God's decided that the interior, an oyster's pretty manky looking on the outside, isn't it? And on the inside, you've got this beautiful mother of pearl with all these colors. And it's so much prettier on the inside. And then why does it make a pearl? It's got no benefit to it. Why it lays layer after layer after layer on top of it. And I think it's because God's teaching us something from it. That he's put a pearl in there to teach us this is how he enjoys things to look beautiful on the inside. And he's not really so concerned about the outside. And he wants layers and layers of things on top of it to lay down from an external source, which is his word into us. And we put down layers as we mull on, contemplate on it. I think it's absolutely stunning that that's what he likes. He enjoys it. Okay. So kind of did all that bit, didn't we? This is a really weird one. I'd have to read this one. Anyone know what that is? Or the name of that thing? We saw some the other day. It's a pogonopheron, definitely a pogonopheron. But they grow up to 1.5 meters long, which is about 5 feet. Anyone know how to translate? It's definitely 5 feet. Exactly, it's funny, it's exactly 5 feet. And they live at the bottom of the sea. We saw some the other day in Monterey Bay Aquarium. That's an amazing place. And we saw some of the weird-looking things. And you know, the redness is actually, it's almost like our lungs and our blood. That's the same kind of stuff in there. Bit of luck that they managed to think of the same thing that evolved, on land, allegedly. But they figured that out too. So they live at the bottom of the sea, next to warm water vents in the Earth's crust. And they don't have a mouth or an anus or an intestine, and they live. So they have no means of getting into them. And the only way that they can get nutrition is through a bacteria which lives with them. So this is one of the most extreme examples of mutualism that you can get. Neither the bacteria nor the tube worm can live without one another. And the way it works is that out of these vents comes hydrogen sulfide, and they oxidize the hydrogen sulfide, and that's where they generate their electricity from. It's not electricity, I know that. It says, and here's the evolutionist bent on it, the pogonophoron could not survive without the bacteria, and the later bacteria probably could not live in the open sea without the physical protection of the pogonophoron. So that's a remarkable thing where you have an extreme version where they cannot live without one another. So these two things had to, if you say they evolved, they had to evolve and then lose the capacity to live externally. But these things live on the very bottom of the sea. They don't have any means to survive if there wasn't two of them that happened to allegedly evolve exactly at the same time. And I find that, again, absolutely amazing. It's got no mouth, stomach, or gut. It absorbs the nutrients from the host bacteria, and neither of them can live without the other. So, I'm not pretending we're going to solve every argument that an evolutionist could come up with tonight, but it gives you some material to question, hey, really all this complexity just happened by chance? All these things just happen to be there and are able to exist. There's some more detail on it there if you want to see how you actually spell it. I'm sure you could guess that from my pronunciation, though. And so I just wanted to finish on that one verse in Psalm 19, verse 3. I just absolutely love it, the complexity of what we see around us. And really, I'm left in awe of God by what he's made. And this is without looking at the stars, this is without looking at all the other things that we could look at, and the fact that the Earth just happens to be exactly the right distance from the sun, and the moon doesn't collide with us. All these things just happen to be. We have an elliptical orbit instead of a circular one, so we get seasons. We have a tilt, we get tides. The moon doesn't suck all the water off on high tide. I mean, so many things. So this beautiful language, which goes then, I mean, what I love about this psalm is it goes into like the establishment of the basis of the honor and glory to God, and then his expression back to us in his law. And so we see something of him and are in stunned awe, and then he gives something to us in the word. And so we have the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul, that beautiful language there. So there is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found the episode helpful. Don't forget, most of these episodes are also available as videos on our video channel, cdvideo.org. So head over and take a look. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please get in touch or leave us a voice message. We love to hear your feedback. You can email us at btf@cdvideo.org. If you enjoyed the episode, then please share it with others. Until next time, may God bless you in your studies and your walk towards God's kingdom. Amen.